When it comes to tenant improvements, what factors should tenants consider in terms of specificity, cost allocation, and timing? How can tenants ensure that their requirements are met during these lease negotiations? What are some key considerations for tenants in maximizing their tenant improvement allowances?
So tenant improvements is one of the places where tenants and landlords get into all sorts of misunderstandings with regularity. And so having someone on your team that has a very firm grasp of tenant improvements saves the time, saves the money, and then saves the headaches, really. And so I think the biggest challenge with tenant improvements is who's doing the scope of work, who's paying for it, and who's in charge of managing the contractor and performing the work. And so there are options in all three of those buckets. And landlords can have architects that will do all of the space planning and test fitting to see if your company fits in the building. Some companies have their own architects that can do that. Each will pay for their own. And then when it comes to the biggest rub, I think that's who's paying for improvements. And so I think it's really about what does the space need first, and then second is what does it cost, and then third is who's going to pay for it. And so you have the tenant paying for it out of pocket, which is what we want as a last resort. You have the landlord pays for it and includes it into the rental rate, and it might be a rental rate that's slightly higher. You have the landlord pays for the improvements and then amortizes it into your rent on top of your rent. So you can think of it as a loan. There's an interest rate and a payback period. And the alternative is sometimes if you are a tenant and you pay for it, you can get free rent in lieu of a tenant improvement allowance. So maybe you pay for your own improvements, but you're not paying for rent when you're paying for your own tenant improvements. And then lastly is the contractor. Is it the landlord's contractor or is it our contractor? And so when you choose your contractor, that's someone you're comfortable with and you're comfortable managing the relationship and the project. But you also think of it as man hours. How many hours is it going to cost you or your team above and beyond your normal workload and above and beyond the relocation project to also manage a contractor and construction? And so sometimes it's not just about the dollar, sometimes it's about the time. And otherwise, overages is probably the fourth part that just comes with construction, change orders and cost overruns. And so most of the time, bids are finalized before construction begins. That's pretty normal. But when there's any tenant contribution to a project, they need to contribute their cash first. So it's only after you've paid your tenant improvement portion that the landlord will pay theirs. And then anything that's above and beyond gets billed back to the tenant.